for the duration. She and I are taking care of my mother.
Oh, how is she?
She's almost 98. She's okay. She's, you know, for someone who's 98 years old, she's in fairly good shape. But you know, there's taking care of her is a job, and she was in an old age home, a retirement home, until about a month and a half ago. And then the virus hit.
Yeah.
And it hit the care homes, they say in English, but the old age homes very hard. So we took her out, and she's in my sister's house in Indiana. My sister is a professor at Indiana University in Bloomington, Indiana. And so I came down from Chicago. I think I got something like the last bus out of Chicago, because they closed it down too.
Like the last chance to exit Chicago, right?
That's right. That's right. Chicago's having a hard time, although it's got a very good mayor, and the governor of Illinois is quite good too.
Deirdre, if you're okay, I'm going to do a small introduction first in Spanish, so people
Of course.
Listen to that one, and then we can go back to English, and we can do it sort of an interview. I have some questions prepared for you. We can see if we have some time for questions from the audience. Is that okay?
Yep.
Perfecto, estamos ya grabando. Es un placer para mí estar dando comienzo a este evento de Fundación Libertad. Mi nombre es Garrett Edwards, trabajo en Fundación Libertad. Tenemos el gran placer, honor y privilegio de contar con la presencia de DEIRDRE McCLOSKEY. Ella es profesora distinguida emérita de Economía y de Historia y profesora emérita de Inglés y de Comunicación, adjunta en Clásicos y en Filosofía de la Universidad de Illinois en Chicago, estudió en la Universidad de Harvard en la década del 60, se graduó como economista, ha escrito más de 24 libros y más de 400 papers académicos y artículos que tratan sobre historia económica, sobre retórica, sobre filosofía, sobre estadística y teoría, sobre la teoría económica, sobre el feminismo, sobre el liberalismo, sobre estudios de género, sobre ética, sobre derecho. De 1968 a 1980 dio clases en la Universidad de Chicago, en el Departamento de Economía, como ella dice, en sus años de gloria. Y ahora se describe a sí misma, ¿sí? Tiene en su sitio web una descripción que actualiza cada tanto, y mira, Deirdre, lo que estoy diciendo en español, como una literaria, cuantitativa, posmoderna, de libre mercado, progresista, episcopalista, ex-marxoide, ¿sí? Del Midwest de los Estados Unidos, una mujer de Boston que en un momento fue hombre, no conservadora, ¿sí? Una cristiana clásica, liberal. I think she understood that last part that I was saying in Spanish.
I understood.
Her latest book is in 2019, Why Liberalism Works, How True Liberal Values Produce a Freer, More Equal, Prosperous World for All. And the talk we have today, it's like a pun on that name, which I really like, because we named the talk that we're having today here at Fundación Libertad, Why Liberalism Worked Before and Why It's Going to Work Now, because it's going to keep working. That's what we think, right, Deirdre?
I believe so.
Pleasure, an absolute pleasure to have you here with us. So we just introduced you in Spanish, which I don't know if it sounded right in English, but
it sounded just fine.
Perfect, that's awesome. So my first question, it's kind of obvious, but I think it ties really well to our last talk when you were here in Argentina in 2019, March 2019. If I had told you last year that 2020 was going to be like this, that there was going to be a world pandemic, and that we were going to have massive lockdowns, and that we were going to be conducting all these events online, would you have believed me, or would you have thought that I was just saying nonsense?
No, I would have believed you, because we've had the beginnings of this kind of event before. And after all, we all had the famous 1819 epidemic of influenza, which killed from 50 to 100 million people. And then we had the SARS and epidemic, which they managed to control, and others. So, if you're a rational person, you know that there are millions of viruses, distinct viruses, well over a million. So sometimes they think 100 million, but there are a lot of them, and
Wow.
they can jump from one species to another and do. So any prudent government would have a plan. And in fact, the Obama administration gave a plan to the Trump administration in a meeting that they had in, I believe it was in December 1919. And the Obama administration people noticed that as the Trump people went out of the room, they threw away the plan. They could see them dropping it in the trash barrel. So, that's the story. So I wouldn't have been surprised, we were all surprised. But it's going to happen again. So the Argentinian government needs to prepare for the next one.
So you would not have been surprised if I had told you about this. You have your bourgeois trilogy. Yes, you have the bourgeois virtues, ethics for an age of commerce. You have bourgeois dignity, why economics can't explain the modern world, right. And then you have bourgeois equality, how ideas, not capital or institutions, enrich the world. I have had the chance to read them. I have had the chance to read as well a little bit of Acemoglu and North. And their idea of materialism. So I was wondering, in your trilogy, in your bourgeois trilogy, you talk about some values that have been present since the Industrial Revolution and how they have played an important role in the way that the world has shaped and in the way that the world has gotten richer and better through time. So in those times, if you had to compare them to the climate right now, would you say that some values have been lost since the Industrial Revolution and some values have been gained, or we're in the same stage?
No, it's not so much the values of the entrepreneurs or the people in business themselves. That argument is Max Weber's argument in his wonderful book of 1905, that the psychology of the bourgeoisie, of the middle class, changed. And it became, they started to work harder and were more interested in saving and so forth. That's wrong. That didn't happen. What did happen is very important for the history of Argentina over the last century. And it is that the attitude of the rest of the society towards entrepreneurs, business people, innovators of all kinds, radically changed. The very word in English, innovation, became a good word in the 19th century, in the 1800s. Before that, it was bad. Oh, no, don't innovate. Ooh, dangerous. So that was the change. It was, so to speak, a sociological change or a political change, not an economic one. And I think we all agree that one of the big problems that Argentina has is that for the past 100 years, and especially since Juan Perón, the attitude of people towards business, towards innovation, has been populist. So, so far as the present situation is concerned, some populist governments, all populist governments have done badly. Take a look at Brazil. Almost all liberal countries, the smaller ones at least, Chile, New Zealand, Denmark, above all, South Korea have done well. So the competence of government, of course, varies tremendously. And some of the authoritarian countries like Vietnam have done well too, because authoritarians are very good at coercion.
Yeah, controlling people and seeing like Big Brother where we are all the time, right?
That's their mode of operation. But of course, so here's my main point. You can be a liberal and still believe that the government should do something about an invasion, by Canada of the United States. I'm terrified that Indians will invade, or a forest fire, or a prairie fire, or something like this virus. But if they don't do it early, as they did not in most European countries or the United States, then it gets out of hand.
Deirdre, you just mentioned the fact that Argentina changed, that Argentina society changed its attitudes, and we just talked a little bit about the Big Brother. And I was thinking, I was going back, I had the chance to read it during this summer, during actually your winter, your memoirs, your revised edition of Crossing, which were actually absolutely fantastic. And there you have this, it's your personal story, of course, about the role that psychiatrists play in society, and that sometimes they are given so much power
Exactly.
that they really don't know what to say, and they think that they can decide on other people's life when they absolutely should not. I was tying this idea, and I was thinking about, and I was discussing this with our common friend Alejandro Bongiovanni right before our talk today, about Plato's philosopher king, right? He had this idea that because some people supposedly had this wisdom and this knowledge, from this part of their head, that they were supposed to be able to have all this power and decide on people's life and all that stuff. Do you think that we might be entering an empire of epidemiologists and biologists kings?
Well, that's a danger. And as you say, it's a very interesting analogy that you're drawing between the rise of psychiatry in the late 19th century and all kinds of very strange social decisions. In Northern Europe, homosexuality, for example, which has nothing to do with gender change, but homosexuality was made against the law. It's not just that the church said it was a sin, but it was illegal. Whereas in Latin countries, this didn't happen. I'm not completely sure about all the Latin American countries, but I do know that Spain, Italy, and France did not have criminal laws against homosexuality, especially men. So that's right. There's a danger that the epidemiologists will become the kings. But, expert knowledge is worth paying attention to. Now, I'm an economist, so I know perfectly well that a lot of the experts are wrong. Although I must say, I taught more of the Chicago boys in Chile and Brazil than Milton Friedman did. I did personally. And the current Minister of Finance in Brazil is a student.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, that's right. He was a student of mine. And they're correct. Those people that I taught, when they say something, they're correct. But all the others
are doing a great job. I mean, we just talked about Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro says crazy things all the time, but their economy, Brazil's economy, seems to be doing okay.
That's right. That's right. That's right. Well, but he says that my former student is a sensible man. By the way, when I went to Brazil last fall, I was supposed to have dinner with him. But then I said something impolite in the newspaper about Bolsonaro, and he canceled the dinner. Well, that's okay. So
Yeah.
expertise, look, expert decisions are sometimes wrong. They often are. The experts got the United States into Vietnam, right? Without these expert generals and foreign policy experts, the United States would not have gone into Vietnam, which was such a disaster. The experts, the experts make mistake. So does public opinion. So does majority voting. So I think we liberals are making the right point that you have to have a competent government, but small. Because if big governments, enormous governments with a very high percentage of national income and regulation and blah, 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 if they are guided either by experts or public opinion, they can make very bad mistakes. So, let's have a small government. Look, here's the other way of looking at it. Markets are artificial intelligence machines. Markets, it's not magic. You can explain it very easily. Markets are pretty good at making economic decisions. Again, not perfect, but pretty good. So it's probably a good idea to leave music, painting, science, it's publishing to the private market, and so to groceries, transportation, and the material goods.
Deirdre, people keep joining. I wanted to mention that we have a Fundación Libertad's president here, Gerardo Bongiovanni. He is connected, and we also have Álvaro Vargas Llosa in the audience. We have various members of
How are you, Álvaro? I owe you a video, which I'm gradually learning how to do. So we'll see how that works.
We also have various members of Fundación Internacional para la Libertad, which is presided by Mario Vargas Llosa. I'm going to say that in Spanish as well. Hay varios miembros de la Fundación Internacional para la Libertad que preside Mario Vargas Llosa, y muchos amigos más que se van conectando y que se van sumando. So we're going to continue in English now. We just said that in Spanish. So we have a society that seems to be in panic, Deirdre. And that at the same time that it feels frightened, it also relegates or gives some of its liberties because they are, of course, fearful of what might happen. And we might be going into a world that is less cooperative, and there's more distancing between countries and between people.
I agree.
Do you think that the world might close on itself in the short run? And do you think that this might have an impact in the long run? Or do you think that this might be something that just goes away and we go back to regular old world?
I think the last is probably the most plausible. And how do I know? I mean, I'm just an economic historian and economist. But of course, we can fear that that government expansion will be greater. Our friends on the left and the right both want to use the government in this way to make it bigger and more powerful in one way or another. There's a Swedish plan, as you know, which works reasonably well, and I'm quite familiar with Sweden. I've taught there and have lots of Swedish friends. And that way of doing it, as long as we use the government or whoever it is to do the testing and the tracing, that's the way to do it. So again, I say there's a coercion that's necessary early in a plague, and I have no objection to that.
Awesome. So I've been thinking a lot, and I think that the audience might have been doing so as well, about Adam Smith lately.
Adam
And
Smith. I always cross myself.
yeah, we have to do that.
Adam
I agree
Smith.
with you. Yeah, it's like uh, I really love Adam Smith, so
Good. We should
I
all
totally
cross
understand.
ourselves. Yeah,
So I've been thinking about Adam Smith, man of the system, and Adam Smith, proven man, right? And uh, what do you think? What would Adam Smith, proven man, do in the world of today? That's one question.
well,
And
so, suppose I answer that so my answers are not so long. I think he would be, let's see, what would Adam Smith think? He would stand in the middle of the market for half an hour and think, which he often did. He'd be walking along with a friend, and then he'd suddenly stop. And his friend would say, Adam, hey, Adam. And he paid no attention. He was thinking. So he would have a thoughtful reaction. But you know, in the Wealth of Nations, he does think there are certain things the government should do. And this is used by our friends on the left to make him one of their people. I think that's wrong. I think he had a very limited idea, which he expresses over and over again in the Wealth of Nations about what government should do. So I think he would probably approve of the Swedish approach, perhaps. He would certainly approve of the New Zealand approach, the South Korean approach, the Irish, you know, a lot of countries, free countries, have done this well. And a number of them, like our own, and I worry about Argentina, have done them badly. And I think that would be his view. So he was, you know, he was not an anarchist. That's
no, I totally agree with you. I was also wondering about his concept of the man of the system, because you just
I'm not hearing the word.
The man of the system, Adam Smith's man of the system.
Monetary? Are you saying monetary?
Man of the system.
Oh yeah, the man of system. I would prefer if he had said the woman of system, but you know.
Oh yeah, we can use
personal opinion.
I mean, we could use a woman of system because we used to have a president who was a woman, and she totally would have gone with that concept. You know,
I just finished a short book, which I hope will get translated into Spanish, about Mariana Mazzucato, an Italian-American English economist, now an advisor to the Italian government, who's written from a kind of Marxist perspective these books that have been quite popular, urging the government to take over innovation and to take over the stock market, essentially. And Alberto Mingardi, a friend of ours, we all know. See, and he and I wrote this short book together. It's called, let's see, what's the title? The Illiberal, I can't remember the title, but it's a full-scale attack on statism.
Okay.
Through her works. And she's just a perfect example of the woman of system who does believe in Smith's image that you can move around economic actors as though pieces on a chessboard.
So, Deirdre, you just talked about what Argentina is doing, and we're talking about the woman of system, right? And we have our president who a few days ago used the analogy of a chess match where you can move the pieces, yes, from one place to another.
That's right.
Yeah, and some parts of the country are reopening in phases, like everywhere else. And they say, okay, so we are going to have hairdressers, and they can open from, I don't know, 3 to 5, and they can cut hair from 2 people. And then you have lawyers and accountants, and they can receive their clients and see them from 7 to 9 or whatever. It doesn't matter. It's like they really think, politicians think right now that they can reorganize society to their fittings, right?
Yeah, I know. Well, it's this partial model that we all have. It's like the old story of the blind man and the elephant. You know, one blind man holds onto the trunk and he says the elephant is a big trunk. And another holds onto his tail and says the elephant is a big tail. And that's the problem that the epidemiologists have on the one hand. Then the economists, the not very good economists have on the other hand. And it's certainly the problem the politicians have, because they don't think of a free society as an artificial intelligence. I say machine, but it's not even a machine. It's an organic entity. And, you know, it makes reasonably good decisions, and we should pretty much leave it alone. And yet they want to intervene. Our great journalist, Henry L. Mencken, from a century ago, H.L. Mencken said that the purpose, or not the functioning of democratic politics, is to frighten people all the time, and then offer the politicians as the man on the white horse, like Juan Perón, or the master, the chess master, who's smarter than you, and he or she is gonna figure it out. And it's got a very bad history in Europe and its offshoots for the last couple of centuries.
Deirdre, with this idea that they are gonna come with a white horse with all the solutions to all the problems that keep on appearing, it seems like the economic incentives for this situation to keep on almost indefinitely, they are right there for politicians to fit that.
They are. That's what Mencken was saying. You make your way in politics by frightening people. And people like Bolsonaro and Donald Trump, I mean, Bolsonaro is kind of a, if you can imagine, a more childish version than Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a kind of an 8-year-old boy. Bolsonaro seems to be about a 4-year-old boy. In any case, their solution is to pretend that's not there, to not do anything, to allow the hairdressers to open. By the way, I do need a hairdresser urgently.
I mean, I cut my hair myself, so I did what I could. So
I once didn't have any problem with hair, and then I changed gender, and now hair dominates my life. But no, one can open the economy, as people keep saying, if you can test and trace. It's really as simple as that. We've known for 100 years, since the coming of the germ theory of disease, that testing, if you have it, and isolation, selective isolation, and tracing of contacts is what you do. There was a great book a long time ago, I read it as a child, by Paul de Kruif. I've learned to pronounce it like a Dutch person, Paul de Kruif, called The Microbe Hunters. And it was an account of this routine in public health. Now, before we had the germ theory, we didn't know what to do. So what we did in the Middle Ages, or right up to 1900, was mass, jailing of people. Stay home, you know.
Yeah, like you have Dubrovnik in Croatia, which is designed in a way where you have this place where people stayed outside before getting into the city.
That's right. That's right. And the doctors would go around with funny masks on and so forth. So that, but as soon as you have the germ theory, then one could do something about it, but you had to do it quickly. You know, it's very similar to an invasion. If Chile decides to invade Argentina because they want to learn how to do the tango or something, it's going to be smart for the Argentinian army to stop them close to the border. If they wait until half of Argentina is taken over by the Chileans, it's not a very smart way to go. And that's the way a lot of governments, whether tyrannies like Russia or democratic countries, basically democratic countries like the United States have gone. Too late.
We are closing in on the first half hour. We are getting a lot of questions from the audience. I have one
glad to answer. And I'll try to be uncharacteristically, I'll try to be brief in my answers so that more people can so that I can chat with more people.
Perfect. So I have one last question that I prepared, which is, I mean, we started with the obvious question at the beginning, and we're going to end with the obvious question at the end, because that way it loops around. So I asked you if you would have believed, if I had told you that this would be like this in 2020, and you told us that you would have believed it because science backed it up. How do you, now let's do a little bit of playing on futurology, which it's always funny because we don't know how it will go and how it will happen, but how do you envision the post-pandemic world? In 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, or whenever we get a vaccine or we get to the new world where things are different?
Well, what I hope and what I expect are not exactly the same thing. Someone said that the behavior of the Trump administration and the Johnson administration in Britain have been the triumph of hope over experience. And one one would like it to be the case that experience over hope. Hope is not a policy. Although, by the way, a certain optimism about the future is basically liberal. And this constant arousing of fears about the future, environmental fears or population fears, or this, the Russians are coming or something, those are usually, almost always, used by politicians and others to justify an expansion of state power. But I actually do think what will happen is that in the United States, Trump will lose the election, and Biden will institute, because he'll also lose the Senate. So it'll be a sweep for the Democrats. I'm not a Democrat in large D. I'm a liberal. But the one good thing they'll do is to take that plan out of the trash basket and implement it. We need more expenditure, not necessarily all by the government, for sure, on virology, on the study of these viruses. And we need sensible, quick action in the case of Ebola. But by the way, we don't have a vaccine for Ebola. It's still there. It could emerge again in a slightly modified form any day. So this is a real fear. This is a rational fear. So I think you can see, I think there's a role for the government, as the left and right is always expressing it. Their idea of a role for the government, as in France, 57% of French GDP is spent by the government. 57%. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So there's a role for the government, but a role for a small government, a small and competent government. So let's hope and to some degree expect that that's what will happen.
So Deirdre, we've been getting a lot of questions. I think one question you kind of answered just right now when you talked a little bit about American politics, because Jorge Palmes asked on the chat if you could give us an idea of what could happen in the US economy if Trump gets reelected and if he doesn't. So you talked a little bit about health public policy. And I think Jorge is asking a little bit about the US economy. What do you think will happen with the U.S. economy in the coming months and years?
Well, I'm not a macroeconomist, and even most of the macroeconomists, it's long time ago, our President Truman wanted a one-handed economist because the economists were always saying on the one hand, on the other. And he wanted the economists to tell him what was going to happen. But if we economists knew what was going to happen, we'd be rich. I would be flying down to Argentina for tango lessons every month. No, I think that there's going to be another peak in the United States, if that's what you mean, because, as you know, lots of states, as in Argentina, are trying to move towards opening the economy. And without proper testing and staffing of the tracing offices, I think it's irresponsible, and that's what's going to happen. And then it's going to happen in the fall, in the autumn, just before the election. There's be a big spike. More or less, regardless, Trump is going to lose. Now, he could win. The way he could win is by changing his personality entirely in the next 5 months. But he can't. He's unable to, as he's shown over and over again. He won't discipline himself to take the advice of experts who actually know. If he were to turn it around and start acting like Merkel in Germany, he might win. If he were to win, there are some good things about the Trump administration. It has deregulated, sometimes in somewhat clumsy ways, but it has, and I'm in favor of that. It relies more on market outcomes, which of course the Democratic Party doesn't like. I mean, it's the choice between a right-wing populist on the one hand and a democratic socialist on the other. It's not a very pleasant thing. But if Trump loses one thing,
a rock and a hard place.
But yeah, that's right. But I think if Trump loses, the Republican Party may become a liberal party. And that would be a very good development. People like my friendly acquaintance, George Will, who's a columnist for the Washington Post. I asked him, yes, George, aren't you really a liberal in my sense, and in the sense that it's used outside of North and South America? And he said, yes, I am. And those people may come back to the Republican Party, and then we'd have a liberal party against a social democratic party.
Deidre, we have a question from Massimo. He is raising his hand here, and he's a member of Fundación Internacional para la Libertad, so I think we're going to open his mic so he can speak.
Certainly.
Deidre, thank you for coming and talking with us.
Here I am in Argentina.
We're mentioning Smith, and you were also mentioning coming back to before. I tend not to like much the situation we were before, because I believe the liberty already left many decades ago. So I think we should look for much more liberty. Anyway, my question was, Milton Friedman, Free to Choose, mentioned the two things that created America. The idea of Adam Smith and the idea of Thomas Jefferson. I mean, how they embodied those ideas. And the idea of Adam Smith now in the society, they became the rhetorics of society. It's what is basically written in your trilogy.
That's right.
While I see that the idea of Thomas Jefferson are definitely not there. The more and more we advance, the more the world seems politics seems that every decision must be a collective action decision. It's not a single, the decision of the single to pursue his own interest.
I know.
On the face of it, it's strange because to teach, and I'm doing with my kids, I'm teaching the invisible lens. It's not something very obvious. The person is not an economist. While the personal liberty, different from totalitarian democracy, is something that is very clear. But for some reason, the difficult part became the norm, and the easy part, in my view, became impossible to implement. So why do you? The rhetoric, the political side of that didn't become mainstream as the economic side.
Well, but as you point out, it was briefly in many countries in the early 19th century the ruling ideology. I think we lose the rhetorical battle. It's not really a battle, a discussion, partly because we tend as liberals to sound like social Darwinists, to sound like, and it's easy for the left and some of the right to paint us that way. And I think we should avoid that. We should, in every speech we give, we should say, look, I'm in favor of poor people. And the best welfare program for the poor of Argentina is a free market and voluntary trade. That's really the best policy, and the history shows it. And I've discovered, I think, in my books, why the great enrichment, as I call it, happened. It happened because people were free. Now, that man you mentioned, Thomas Jefferson, was conflicted, because though he said all men and women, dear, are created equal, he also owned slaves right to the end of his life and beyond. He did not free them when he died in 1824. So this ideology had a hard coming. But look, we have to emphasize that we're in favor of poor people, because we are. And I have two more suggestions about vocabulary. That we abandon the word capitalism, which I've described as a scientific mistake embodied in a single word, because it suggests that capital is the way forward. No, it's not. Invention is. Being free to innovate. So I suggest, instead of calling it capitalism, we start calling it innovism. And then, as far as our ideology of liberalism is concerned, we should say liberalism leads to innovism, which leads to enrichment of poor people. And we should also call it, to speak of your own kids, we should call it adultism. Because that's the basic core of Adam Smith's thought, John Stuart Mill, Milton Friedman, and others. That is, we treat other people as though they were adults. And both on the right and the left, the impulse is to treat people as though they were children. So those are my rhetorical suggestions.
Deirdre, we have a couple more questions before we finish this event. There's also, we have the presence of the writer and the Chilean ambassador in Spain, Roberto Ampuero, who's also in the audience with us today. And we have this question, which I think it's quite interesting. In your books, you talk about the intellectual error of romanticizing the country life in front of the apparent vice that you have in cities, right? And we have this disease that has been affecting mostly cities, very populated cities.
Yeah,
do you think that this will deepen this error, and that we will have more intellectuals thinking that this dichotomy is the right dichotomy?
Well, you know, it's always been true that centers of population at least because they're big, they get a lot of press. And so when they have these plagues, it's since the plague of Athens in the late 5th century, this keeps happening. But yeah, there is this bucolic bias, which in most countries, I'm not sure about Argentina, but it's certainly true of the United States and many other countries, is the countryside is favored in voting. In the United States, North Dakota, which has a population at most of 400,000 or something like that, has the same number of senators as California, which has over 10% of the population of the United States. So there's this voting bias. It's true in Hungary, for example, and was part of the basis for Orban's success. Yeah, there's an old feeling that industry and cities are corrupting. In a way, I think it's the basis of both Marx and Carlyle. Carlyle being the conservative figure in England, and Marx being the left-wing figure. And not so much Marx. Marx and Engels spoke famously about the idiocy of rural life, and were in fact in praise of the urban bourgeoisie. But their followers, especially their kind of, I call them Marxoid, the way I was once when I was young, they believe vaguely in Marxism, and they're the ones who are opposed to the urban. I said I wouldn't give long answers, but I can't seem to help it.
I think you actually did quite a good job on that front. I mean, I wouldn't say that they were long. I have one more question before we close the meeting today. So there are some people that are wondering what's your stance on Taleb's opinion on the pandemic. He's been writing a lot on Twitter about Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Oh, yeah, I don't know what he's thinking about. He's an acquaintance of mine. Does he? I don't know what his opinions are.
Oh, well, he said that even though he's written a lot of black swans, he says that this is not a black swan, that this was something that could be expected to happen.
That's what I said at the very beginning here. I said that it's going to happen every 5 years.
And he's also said that he's in favor of measures, quarantines, lockdowns, and that's why he's been a little bit criticized by some people, but I guess that you'd agree with most of what he's been saying.
I agree, conditional on the time. Well, look, once you've made the mistake of not treating it like a foreign invasion or a forest fire, and you've allowed the foreign invasion or the forest fire to get very big, then you have to do radical governmental interventions. You can't just let the invasion happen, or the Chileans will take over Argentina, although actually, from the economic policy point of view, that might be a good idea for Argentina. Yeah. Please don't, I don't want, but
maybe we should visit them.
Please delete that from the, because that won't please Argentina.
Don't worry. DEIRDRE, we really want to thank you for the time that you have given us. We hope that when the world comes back to the way it used to be, or when people are able to travel again, that you're able to visit us in Argentina again to eat some asado and to dance some tango and to be with us. So it's been a real pleasure. As they say in Italian, which I know you like, professoressa.
Sì, professoressa. Bravo.
So I guess that people might be clapping on their side of their computers. We are not listening to them. I'm sure that they all.
Garrett, tenemos una última pregunta de Álvaro.
Okay, We have one last question
Ciao.
from Álvaro Vargallosa, so we'll listen to him.
Ciao, ciao. Bye-bye.
Wait, Deidre, don't leave. We have one last question.
Sure.
Can we unmute Álvaro?
You can go as long as you want.
Yeah.
Hello? Hear me?
It's not working out. Alvaro, are you talking?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much for your thoughts. And I'm sorry to butt in like this. Very quick question. You mentioned that if the Republican Party is defeated in the November elections, this might cause a significant shift within the Republican Party towards something resembling, at least vaguely, a liberalism. Who do you see as a standard bearer of that kind of shift? Can you think of any person or?
Well, there's Rand Paul. I've suggested in print that Rand Paul change his first name to Adam, Adam Paul, in honor of Adam Smith instead of Ayn Rand, who I don't think much of. But I think there are lots of old-fashioned Republicans, and there are many of them. They're on the TV all the time saying, oh, I hate it. I want to go back to the older Republican Party, and that's the party of Reagan and of Goldwater. And on both counts, not entirely in their outcomes, but they were much more liberal than the Trump people. Mm-hmm. So I have hope on this account and maybe something of an expectation. I don't see that there's a long-term success possible for a Trumpian Republican Party. Mm-hmm. And now look, at any moment, we know this. Argentina, the United States, France, and Germany, wherever you talk about, something like a quarter of the population would like to be treated as children, don't want to be adult, want the man on the white horse, are essentially in their most deepest desires. If you like nationalism and you like socialism, maybe you'll like national socialism. And that's what this quarter of the population wants. So let's pray. I'm an Anglican, so I'm gonna pray.
Deidre, thank you very much. We're gonna open up the mic so we can hear the clapping.